So we're going through the 10 Commandments. And you know, the commandments are not just a bunch of rules. They are a foundational to our developing moral and ethics in our lives. You might think of it like the foundations of a house. You know, they build a house, they start out with the foundations and they put the structure up and they add to the structure. I got a picture of a house that had lots of pretty large beams, and each of these commandments are like the structure of what it means to be a follower of God. They are what we build on. They don't say everything about what it means to live out your faith, but they're main parts of it. And so you need to be aware of them so that you can follow them. And so I hope you start to memorize these. These are something that we all need to have in our memory. Some of our memories aren't as good as others as you get older. But the first commandment, you remember, was you shall have no other gods. Remember that one? The second one, remember what that one was? That's right. You should not have an idol, no idols. And the third one was don't take the Lord's name in vain. And then the fourth one was remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. So that's the first four, and they deal with our relationship with God. Now the next six deal with our relationship with each other. And these are all foundational to who we're supposed to live like. So today we're going to look at these. The fifth commandment is very necessary. Exodus 20:12, honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land your Lord God is giving you. A couple of things about it to begin with. Notice that it talks about father and mother, even though it was very much a patriarchal society, and most people would think it would say honor your father, but it says honor your father and your mother. And then it says so that you may live long in the land of the Lord your God has given you. We often think that means so you'll live a long life, which says something in the New Testament about that. But this text actually says so that as a community, Israel may live long in the promised land. And so it's clear about this. Now, today in our culture, we don't follow this. We really don't. I'm not saying personally each of you don't follow it, but I think as a culture, we put a lot more positive emphasis on younger people than older people. I mean, that's just the way this culture is. It reminds me of a story that I think is pertinent here. It comes from, there were two men, they were brothers, with both of them with the last name of Grimm, and that's a sad last name. But they came up with these fairy tales that they're so powerful. You know, you may remember many of them. They make movies and shows into them. This one you may not know. It's called The Old Man and His Grandson, and let me tell you about it. So there's a story about an old man who'd gotten older, and in his old age, he'd become senile somewhat. And he lived with his son and his daughter-in-law and their young son. So they all lived together, and the daughter-in-law had become less and less happy with her father-in-law because he was always dropping things at the supper table, and he was messy, and she saw him as a nuisance. And over the months and years, she turned her husband against his father and convinced her husband that his father was really a pain, a nuisance. And so one day, the old man was having a particular messy dinner, and so she said, that's enough. And so he was feeble, so she picked him up and carried him in the other room and put him at a table behind the stove, or on the other side of the stove. And she said, well, you eat here from now on. And so with his eyes blinking, not surely what was going on, he started eating his porridge there from the earthenware bowl that she had given him. And he stayed in there. Every time they ate, he would eat there. And then one day his hands were shaking. He dropped the earthenware bowl and broke it. And the daughter-in-law became very furious, and she said, okay, if you're going to eat like a pig, you might as well eat like a pig. And so they lived on a farm. She went out and grabbed the trough for the pig sty. She brought it in, put it on his table there, and said, this is what you eat out of. And so that's where they would serve him his food, and this went on for a while. One afternoon, the young grandson was sitting on the floor, and he had a piece of wood, and he was carving on it. And his father said, hey, son, what are you making? And he looked up proudly, and he said, you know, Daddy, I'm carving a trough for you and Mommy, so I'll have something to feed you out of when you get old. And the son and daughter looked at each other. They didn't say anything, but they began to weep. And they got to thinking about it. And so the son went back in the other room, picked up his father, carried him back, put him in the comfortable seat. And from then on, they never complained or got angry at the way he ate again. Now, that is a sad and powerful story. And for me, it teaches the same lesson that this commandment teaches. What is that? A society that destroys the family destroys itself. The fifth commandment says, if you eliminate honor in the family, you eliminate honor. And that's a little bit of what we have today. And so I want to think about how we keep this commandment today. I look back at some of my messages because there are 2 days of the year that we really focus on this text. Guess when? Mother's Day and Father's Day. And a lot of my sermons on Mother's Days and Father's Days are how to be a better mother or how to be a better father. That's not what this text is about. This text is about how we should honor fathers and mothers. And so I want to look for a few minutes. How do I honor my parents when you're a child? How do you do it as a teenager? How do you do it as a young adult and as a mature adult? And I'm not going to ask any of you how old you are. You just figure out which you fit in. First, as a child, I honor my father and mother by obeying them. Obeying them. Ephesians 6:1 says, children what? Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And kids are supposed to do this willingly, cheerfully, and immediately. Doesn't always work that way, but it means that parents are supposed to give something for the kids to obey. That means that kids should have chores. They should learn what it means to make their bed, learn what it means to, dress themselves, eventually maybe to cook, maybe to learn how to change a tire, to teach them something, and that they should obey this. Now, notice it says in the Lord, because unfortunately we live in a world that sometimes parents teach wrong things. So if your parent teaches you something that's against what the Bible teaches, you don't just blindly do whatever they say. You obey them in the Lord, for this is right. So that's the first. And by the way, a kid who grows up thinking nobody is ever going to tell me what to do has never learned this. Now, we do have people like that never have learned how to obey. And so then it really hurts your whole culture. So what about as a teenager? As a teenager, you honor your father and mother by respecting them. I'm not saying that you don't also obey, but respecting is a big issue for teenagers. It's easy for teens to start looking at their parents and thinking, oh, wow, my mom, she doesn't know anything about that phone she has. Or he doesn't know anything about how this works. And so all of a sudden, these kids who at 11 or 12 were really your best friends become like strangers to you in some ways. And but teenagers are supposed to respect their parents. In Leviticus 19:3, it says, each of you must respect your mother and your father, and must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. And then in Hebrews 12:9, it says, moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. Hebrews 12:9 says, how much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? Then in Proverbs chapter 13, intelligent children listen to their parents. Foolish children do their own thing. And so, as young people should be respectful, and if you're a young person, you should think of it this way. Do I talk to my friends the same way I talk to my mom? Do I treat them the same way? And I would guess that with some teenagers, if they did that, they'd have no friends. You have to treat people with respect. Third, as a young adult, you honor your father and mother by listening to them. You listen to them. You don't just brush them off. It says in Proverbs 23:22, listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. As you get into the part of life where you're an adult, you will realize that your parents are not perfect, probably long before then, and that they make mistakes and they have done a lot of things wrong, but you should still listen to them. Actually listen, not just give them lip service. Parents are like coaches. They mentor you and they prepare you for life. God has given them to you, and so you need to honor them by listening to them. Now, as a grown adult, which a lot of us here are, you honor father and mother by two things: appreciating them and providing for them. First, you appreciate their efforts. Do you know how much it costs to raise a kid today? A lot. A lot. And it's not easy, because a lot of kids are, challenging, let's say it that way. In California, I had never been to California, but I know that they have these big trees called redwoods. And if you see a redwood cut down, they're so big, you can look at the rings from the tree that's been cut down. And from those rings, you're able to determine not only how old the tree is, but what kind of environment the tree lived in. If there's a lot of space between a ring, it means that there was a lot of rain, good condition. The tree grew a lot. But if there's not much space between the rings, well, that means that that must have been a hard year. Now, think back in your life how you behaved. I wonder how many of you had parents that had some very narrow rings when you were a teenager. Look at your parents. How much gray hair or no hair do they have on their head? You should appreciate them. Did you hear about the story about the mom that was going through Walmart with her little girl in the cart, and the little girl was mad because she couldn't buy some toy, and the entire time the girl was screaming. And the mother kept saying, now calm down, Ellen. It will be all right, Ellen. It's almost time to go home, Ellen. She kept saying this over and over again, and one of the clerks there at the store saw her and said, I just want to commend you on how you're talking to your daughter, Ellen. And the woman said, who's that? Said, my name is Ellen. She was talking to herself. You got to appreciate the sacrifice your parents made in bringing you along. And second, provide for them. You got to take care of them financially, emotionally, support them. It says in 1 Timothy 5:4, if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their family, their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. And so it's clear the Bible teaches, unfortunately, many other cultures like Asian cultures and Middle Eastern cultures and African cultures, we see them taking care of their parents more actively, providing them, and in this culture, not as much. And I see this from time to time. I see like one child doing all the work, take care of their parent, leaving it to all to somebody else. They don't take their part. And that's what the commandment, honor your parents, is. It means that you do that. In fact, 1 Timothy 5:8 has very strong words for people who don't. It says, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. It's pretty clear. We're supposed to take care and honor our parents at every stage of life. That's the 5th commandment. 6th commandment, keep going. Do not commit murder. Okay. There's a wide scope of this command. Do not commit murder. You know, it includes, you could include war, capital punishment, suicide, abortion, euthanasia, self-defense. I don't have time to do all of this right now. It would take a long time, but I do want to talk about, what does this mean? Thou shalt not commit murder. The word in English for murder, you know, we have several words that mean killing in English. You have assassinate, murder, massacre. All these words mean murder. And in Hebrew, they had a number of words that referred to killing. Most common word for killing in the Old Testament was called harag. And it meant basically a different kind of killing than the word that we have here. The word we have here is ratzak. Ratzak. And in Hebrew, it means, it's never used in the killing of a soldier in battle. It never refers to self-defense, this word. It's never used for suicide, and it's never used where God is involved. Ratzak refers to the accidental or purposeful killing of one person by another. And since if it's an accident, you can't really prohibit it because that's an accident. But the idea of thou shalt not kill, really, it should be translated, I think, thou shalt not commit murder. It's the purposeful killing of one person by another person. In their day, they would have cities of refuge. In Israel, if you killed somebody, you could go to that city and they couldn't deport you. So the translation here is murder. And so the idea behind all this in this commandment is that human beings are made in the image of God. Every human being on this planet, it doesn't matter what country you're from, what color you are, how much you have, what you don't have, every human being is made in the image of God. And so we should treat them. Do you know what lasts forever? Do you know what is eternal? Human beings live eternally in heaven or hell. The things that are priceless. And so we ought to think of them that way. I remember when I was in Atlanta visiting my mom at one time. I had my kids and we took them to the aquarium, the Atlanta Aquarium there. And I'll never forget, do you know in the middle of Atlanta in July, I saw beluga whales? Do you know how much money it takes to feed and care for these whales that live in very cold water in the middle of downtown Atlanta? And I thought it was a fabulous experience, but then I walked out of the place, and right across the street from this museum were homeless people living on the streets. And I got to thinking, are those whales going to last forever? And I'm not saying we shouldn't take care of animals. I love animals. But human beings are different than animals. They're made in the image of God. You know, I like to think of it this way. When I first started in ministry, a mentor told me one time, you know, every person has ascribed and earned authority. And when you start off as a church, when you're a pastor, you have some ascribed authority because you are a pastor. But you also have earned authority, and this happens over time when people respect you and they listen to you and they see that you are a good worker and you're doing things and you're being faithful, and so that you have earned authority. Well, we today only work on earned authority, and we forget that God has given everyone ascribed authority. And that's why this commandment says you should not commit murder. So I want to unpack what does it mean to commit murder. There are 5 different ways. One guy has written about this, and he came up with 5 ways to break the 6th commandment. Thou shalt not commit murder. First one, everybody agrees with, don't kill anybody. Okay? Killing someone with your hand, and I'm not saying just not using just your hands, but any way that you physically kill another person, don't do that. Second, killing someone with your mind. What do you mean by that? Well, if you have hateful thoughts about another person, you're not supposed to have that. Matthew 21, Jesus said, you've heard it said that people who lived long ago, they were told, do not commit murder, and anyone who murders will be judged for it. But here is what I tell you, do not be angry with your brother. Anyone who is angry with his brother will be judged. And the word for anger here means simmer. And it means, somebody who starts off being angry at somebody, and then they become a slow burn, a dislike, a resentment, and eventually goes to a hatred of another person. It says, don't do that. That's like murder. Don't get worked up about people like that. Third, it says you can kill somebody with your tongue. And other than just your words, you can also kill them with your texts or your posts on social media. Any way you communicate language. In Jesus' day, it says in Matthew 5:22, again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, must stand trial in the Sanhedrin. What does that mean? Well, Jesus spoke Aramaic. In Aramaic, Raka means you're nothing. An example of this is that you ever had somebody so upset with you that they won't even answer you? You can see them and say good morning, and they don't even say good morning back. They just treat you as if you were nothing. And that's like murdering. He says, and if anybody says, you fool, you'll be in danger of the fire in hell. Now, the Greek word for fool here is moros. We get the word moron. And I know that we all break these things. There might be some time we say, he's just a moron. Well, the Bible says don't do that. That you're not supposed to do that. It's like murdering somebody with your tongue. 4, holding help from someone who is perishing. If you see somebody who is dying and you don't step up to help them, that's like murder. That's a violation of this commandment. Number 5, when you withhold or neglect to give to someone that which is necessary to preserve and strengthen their life. That's like murder. In another sense, I know that one of the things that in this city, when I first moved here, I was surprised to learn that Waynesburg didn't have any homeless people. That's what I was told. And then I found out that, yes, we do. And a lot of times when the police would just ignore the people who are homeless, or they would drive them to a shelter in Newport News. And so there was a couple of ladies that were part of a church, and they felt convicted by this. And so about 13 years ago, they started COFM, Community of Faith Mission. They asked churches in the area, including our church from the beginning where we're involved in this, and they said, hey, can you take turns hosting the homeless? And so we have been a part of that since it began. And so every church during the winter months will open their doors. They provide a hot meal to people to come in free of charge. They provide a place to sleep that's safe and warm in the winter months. They provide a breakfast. They provide, a lot of them, a snack lunch, and give them a bag lunch. And so our church has been involved in this, and you can be involved in this. You don't have to do everything. You do a little piece of it. And we'll have sign-up sheets in the back. And because the commandment says if you withhold or neglect to give to somebody which is necessary to preserve and strengthen their life, it's like violating the commandment. Matthew 25, Jesus said this clearly. He said of the story of the sheep and the goats, he said, they will also answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty and not help you? And when did we see you as a stranger or needing clothes or sick in prison and not help you? And Jesus says, well, you might not have seen me. What I'm going to tell you is true. Anything you didn't do for one of the least important of these, you didn't do for me. So he's very clear about that. You know, we have a tendency to put people in categories and say, oh, they're just morons, or they're just an idiot, or I'm not even talking to them, or whatever. And Jesus said, no, that's not the way you're supposed to behave. There's a show I like watching once in a while. It's an English show. It's called Father Brown. I find it on PBS. And in the story, they have this pastor who's a really smart guy. I like it because a lot of the pastors in the media are idiots. So I like this one. And he is. He's not a good-looking young guy, but he's really smart. And he always catches the murderer and the thief or whatever there might be because he's very good at figuring it out. And somebody asked him once, how do you figure this out, Father Brown? And he said, well, it's all a theological issue. And everything I've been talking about, these foundations are really theological issues, because what we don't understand is sin is in all of us. We are all sinners. If you think of it like seeds, in each of your life, you have the seeds of sin. Now, what determines if they grow or not? If you water them, if you plant them, if you nurture them, those sins will grow. And so these commandments are put to us to realize, well, these are the things that we should avoid. We should not do these things and do these things, because they always lead to doing good things. And so I pray that as we go through this list of commandments, it will renew as we begin this year and through January and February. We will draw closer to being what God has called us to be and having a good foundation in our hearts and our behaviors.